The biggest mistake I see when people are trying to be good in bed is that they only go to the practical techniques or the physical techniques. That they're like, okay, I just have to watch these 3 tips to blow her mind. But what they actually need to do is figure out how to be in dialogue with their partners.
Our guest today sits at the intersection of media, culture, and embodied sexuality. Laura Ramadei is a certified sexologist and sexuality coach through the Sexual Health Alliance. She's a writer whose work has been featured in the LA Times, Slate, and Erotic Review, and the host of the feminist comedy podcast, Girls on Porn. Through her work, she's helping people understand how adult media shapes our expectations around sex and why so many of those expectations leave us disconnected from real pleasure. Today, Laura steps inside the lab to talk with us about her experience in podcasting, writing, and being in the media in the sexual health space, along with her work as a sex coach. She shares with us why so many people feel disconnected from their bodies without realizing it, and what strategies help rebuild that connection. If you've ever been curious about the multifaceted life of a sex coach and podcaster, you won't want to miss a minute of this episode. Welcome to Sexology Lab. Each week, we speak with the most compelling minds in modern sexology to ask the questions shaping the future of desire, connection, and human wellness. Let's dive in. Welcome to the lab, Laura Ramadei.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being with us today. Now, where in the world are you joining us from?
I'm in Los Angeles at the moment.
Fabulous. Now, I want to start out by having you tell us a little bit about your experience with podcasting, writing, and media in the sexual health space.
Absolutely. So I'm a certified sexologist through the Sexual Health Alliance, and that all came about initially like through my journey podcasting. I host a podcast called Girls on Porn. We review porn essentially from like an intersectional feminist lens. It's a comedy podcast. We're kind of sneaking the vegetables in with the dessert, but it's all about porn and like where to find ethical adult content if that's what you're looking for. I'm also a writer with a strong focus on all things sex and relationships, and I work as an intimacy and relationship coach as well.
Amazing. So what made you start Girls on Porn? And what were you seeing in culture that made you think this conversation needed to happen?
It really was my personal need that brought the idea for the podcast about. So Rachel and I were really good friends and kind of knew each other through the theater space, but we didn't know we were both so sex positive. Like we didn't have that knowledge as friends. And that just kind of naturally started to surface, where we realized that we were the only women we had in our lives who would really speak openly about adult content and where we were consuming it and how we were finding it and the things that we were looking out for that made us feel safe or unsafe. So we started to trade clips and talk about different platforms we were finding. And that kind of gave birth to the idea itself. I was going to move into an apartment with her. And I was like, man, if these walls could talk, that would be a podcast. And I was like, maybe it should. And how fun to hear 2 women review porn, like 2 women talk about adult content, giving their assessment of what turns them on or what makes them feel uncomfortable. We're also both in the entertainment space. So we were worried about the performers. Like, is that person consenting and comfortable? Are they being exploited in this space? How do we know? So the idea was really my natural curiosity when I was consuming this content. This was the era when adult content was free and accessible for the first time in our lives. And for anyone really to have that much access that easily. So we really were like, okay, how do we find our way through this space? And we just invited our audience along on that journey with us.
It's so cool. And growing up as a millennial, I think anytime the topic of porn or adult content came up among my girls' friend group, it would always be like, ew, porn. Girls don't watch that. What do you think about that?
Rachel and I joke a lot on the show about how we were both the kinds of friends that were like, should we check out this show? That are like, let's watch this sex scene together. That we were the friends that were really interested in that stuff. And maybe sometimes in a way that was off-putting to other friends. Or we were just lucky to have friends growing up that were open to it. Like
Yeah.
me and my best friend definitely poured over those really problematic listicles in Cosmo of like how to give a mind-blowing blowjob, which like I cannot advocate for. Most of the advice in those listicles is not helpful, especially to teenagers who don't know any better about what ideas might actually be as hurtful or unhelpful as they would be helpful. It was always very sex positive and always very comfortable talking with friends about that kind of thing. And it was more just a matter of sussing out who would be comfortable with me and who would be open to those kinds of conversations. And Rachel was definitely one of those friends. So it just kind of naturally turned into a podcast. We're like, hey, I'm the horny kid at the sleepover too.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I think I got most of my sex education through Cosmo. The only place I found sexual content was in Cosmo, and I snatched up that new magazine every month.
Yeah, you and so many others growing up in this country. I was very lucky to get a pretty good sex education of all things through my church. I was going to a Unitarian Universalist church in middle school. And for those that don't know, religion is barely a religion, is like how I like to refer to it. It doesn't have a dogma. It's not made of rules. It's actually about acceptance and the inherent dignity of all people. And in that particular congregation, they would reference the teachings of Buddha and Jesus Christ. They would pull from different scriptures. And it just really was like a really beautiful community. I don't know if it's still in existence today. But at the time, they had a program called About Your Sexuality. It later changed to being called Our Whole Lives, maybe to get away from the word sex in it. But it was a sex education class, and it was the most progressive education I could have asked for in sixth grade. The example I give is that we were assigned to go out and buy a condom. We were assigned to go buy barriers just to destigmatize it, the assumption being that we weren't sexually active yet, but that we needed to be comfortable doing that if we were going to have sex. So let's get comfortable going to the Walgreens and putting a box of condoms on the counter and just buying it and like get that part over with. So that's not in the way of your sexual safety once you do start to engage in sex. I did it with my friend Ben and we were giggling and it was like, like, are we gonna, and then it wasn't an issue. And I became the friend who had that kind of secret knowledge, who had more information than a lot of the other kids. So I had this sort of foundational basis beyond the Cosmos, although I was still reading them. There was still like, there's practical tips in here, like we weren't told how to give a blowjob in that sex ed class in sixth grade. It was just a full picture about different STIs and masturbation and sexual pleasure and the broad picture of it. But yeah, there's still like a huge lack of resources when it comes to the practicalities of sex itself.
Yeah. And that is so progressive for that time frame. That is really cool. You had that experience.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. I mean, it's obviously set my life on a very specific path that I didn't really unfold until I was later in my adulthood. Like I didn't realize how much it would come to fruition, but it was so formative in a really wonderful way.
It's 2026. So do you think that adult media has become the default sex education for most people?
I really think it has. Unfortunately, of course, I think there are other resources available, but they're not as widely known or accessible, right? Like the biggest difference, I think, is access. And because of the way media works right now, there's a lot of adult content available for free. And I don't think that really benefits anyone, but that just follows the model of digital media. If we can shove an advertisement in your face, we can give you the content for free, and that can support the corporate model of the platform that is delivering the content itself. So a lot of people go there because that's easier than going to a workshop or taking a class, not to mention the fact that it's private, or at least relatively private at the moment, as far as we know, that it feels more private to go to a website and no one will ever know what it is that you're consuming or what it is that you're pursuing. I really thought about this question ahead of our recording because I was like, I so badly don't want that to be true, but I think it's more and more true because we're dismantling education programs, especially here in the US. There's no requisite across states around sex education. So many states still have abstinence-only education as the only option available, which I'm so sorry isn't sex education. It's fallen on the shoulders of adult content creators to be the closest thing to education. And I want to be clear that like it's not a sex education. It's, if anything, like a misconception of what sex is. And there are a lot of really wonderful, particularly like indie creators who are aware of that tension and essentially of that pressure and obligation to be the only opportunity for education for a lot of people. And some have created platforms or created content that is specifically educational and gives you tools for those practicalities. Like if you don't know how to squirt or help someone squirt, here's a video to do that. If you've never had strap-on sex before, here's a video to do that. So those resources do exist, but they're not so much available. They're not clickbaity, so they're not popular on like those free aggregates that a lot of people are going to who don't know where else to look. So by default and by virtue of how our society is structured and our attitude towards sex, I think that adult content is the best available right now. Because I've consumed so much and I know the landscape so well, I can point them to an ethical site and say, hey, invest the $25 a month in this site because this will give you a chance to look into your specific proclivity, where you can see what this kind of domination scene looks like, where you can see what this kind of role playing might be, or how these tools work, that like you can actually watch that demonstrated. And that's what a lot of people actually need.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. What's the problem though? Consuming adult media for education, what is it teaching people about sex that's fundamentally inaccurate?
Bottom line is that it's framing sex as this incredibly performative thing, right? The joke we make a lot on the show is that it's like watching the Olympics and thinking that's what it looks like to go for a jog. These are peak athletes, literally athletes. Porn performers have to stay in shape in order to do these scenes day after day and be able to quote unquote perform. And a lot of them are doing incredibly acrobatic things to create that thumbnail that's going to click through, that's going to make them a valuable performer in those spaces. So there's a competition that they're all reckoning with that doesn't necessarily correlate to sexual pleasure. If you can throw me over your shoulder and flip me around, that might be fun in the moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm actually going to come. Great intimacy is actually about connection and safety and being able to communicate to each other what you both like, what you each like, being able to feel comfortable enough with someone to have that exchange and to cultivate the space to enjoy that. And porn is all about performance. It's all about looking a certain way. It's all about body parts fitting a certain model, which we know that it is definitely less than 20%. That's like a generous estimate, but less than 20% of people with vaginas can come from penetration alone. It's more like 4 to 5% who can do so consistently. So we think that big dicks matter, and they matter in the sense that we have a psychology around the idea that the big dick is ideal. Yeah. And there might be women out there that are like, I want the biggest dick. But let me tell you, like physiologically, honey, like it's more complicated than just getting prodded into coming. Like for a lot of people, that's just simply not how it works. And the reason dicks are so big in porn is largely for the camera angle. It's largely so that the dick can go in and out and you can still see it. Porn is this competition, right? It's this clickbait race. So the dicks have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of many decades in order to create that sense of taboo, keep the porn sort of feeling edgy, like it's sort of competing with itself to be more and more startling, impossible to believe, incendiary, because it's so taboo. That creates this more and more unrealistic expectation of what your dick is supposed to look like or what sex is supposed to look like.
Yeah. And it seems like at the end of the day, it's not creating better sex, but just better performance for people.
It's creating a higher like pressure to perform. It's creating a higher expectation of what sex is supposed to look like. And I don't want to say that's all porn, because like this is also something that happens, right? Like we start talking about porn like a monolith, but it's an entire industry. It's like saying clothing. Yeah. There are so many different kinds of clothing. Clothing can warm you up, but it doesn't necessarily always do that. There is porn that creates realistic expectations. There is porn that has great instructional components or things that are demonstrated in a really effective way, but you have to know where to find that, and you have to have some media literacy around what you're consuming so that you know, like, this is designed to be ridiculous and impressive. I don't need my cum to shoot across the room that far. That's just for the shot and may not even be real cum. Whereas someone discerning might understand, like, this is for the visual of it and not necessarily for the people experiencing the sex, or it may not mean that my partners would want or need that.
Does put some pressure on the performance aspect. Like maybe I'm supposed to be making certain sounds. Like maybe I'm supposed to be really loud. maybe I'm supposed to be, saying things to my partner that I think will turn them on. Like there's so many things that
Yes,
could be going through
so
your
many
mind.
things that create like an idea of what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the further we go into that narrative of what I'm supposed to be doing, the further we get from our actual pleasure and feeling grounded in the space. And of course, sex is performative. If there's another person in the room, there's obviously like some component of performance, but I think great sex is actually about being able to shed that and being able to be as authentic and present as possible with some elements of performance. And like, this is how I've learned I like to perform sex. This is how I've learned I like to be embodied in my experience, but I also feel really comfortable contorting my body and getting weird and making crazy faces when I orgasm, because that's what happens. Like, because that's what I need to do. That's what I do on my own. Can I build trust with someone else in order to do that in front of them?
And now what's one thing that you think that people assume is normal, I'm putting that in quotes, in bed, but it actually comes from watching porn?
The speed and ease with which women come in porn is not it. It's not real. A lot of those performers are faking it. They're doing this day after day. They're performers. They are professionals who are performing. Some of them can and do enjoy incorporating an orgasm into their work. And if they're with the right director or on the right set, they might be supported in getting there. But I've also been in the room on some of these sets when these guys have to pop off. And it's a very bizarre exercise. And I feel really bad for a lot of them. Like some of them can get there pretty easily, consistently, but occasionally it's like, okay, we've got to pause. We got to stop rolling to change the angle. The guy goes over to a couch and pulls up his own porn and is jacking off to get as close as possible there. We're like, okay, rolling, and then just runs over and comes. And it's this really strange, like private moment that he has to have in order to get there when he's not performing, right? Like he's a professional performer and he's like, I'm going to go over here and do this over here and then come back and like do it in the moment. So yeah, this misconception about what orgasm looks like and how it's achieved is often very hard to find accurate representation in adult content. And I look to the indie spaces for that. I look to certain performers, certain platforms where they're producing films where like that is cultivated on set and meant to be accurately represented in terms of like how the story and the erotic minds of the characters or performers are present, and or if it's like performers making scenes together who know each other and feel comfortable sharing like, here's how I'll get there, here's what you can do, and can incorporate that into the scene. So it's not so much the studio demand of here's what it has to look like, it's them actually fostering that themselves.
One of the biggest questions I get from people is, where do I find ethical adult media? So Laura, what are some of your favorite sites and places to find ethically made adult media?
Absolutely. I'll walk you through a handful of my favorites. Pinklabel.tv is a curated site run by Shine Louise Houston, who is one of the few women of color in this space in leadership, and I should say a queer person of color as well. So that is a great site for queer, trans, different race representation, different bodies, different genders, different sexualities. All independent porn that's been licensed directly from the creators or from other platforms, and it's a pretty vast catalog. So that's a great place where like some of those examples I gave earlier of like, I've never pegged someone or I've never put on a strap. That's a site where you can see like something that feels more human happening and people indulging that kind of sex that looks very different than a lot of the mainstream sex that's out there. Kink.com is a mainstay for all things kink, and it gets quite extreme. So that's one of those sites I go to or I direct clients to if they're like, I think I really might be into medical kink, or I think I want to experiment with DP, or I think I want to be bound and gagged and flogged. That's the site I send them to. One of the things that almost all of the videos on kink have this, because it's a kink.com practice, is pre and post interviews. So included in the scene is an interview where the performers share their boundaries, their hard limits of like, don't call me a whore, but I'm okay with slut, and here's the term I would prefer you use when you refer to my cock. Like they talk about all of that, and you see the performers discussing it and negotiating it together, and then you check in with them after to see like, how did that go? What was difficult? Was that fun? And most of the time it's oh, I had a blast. That was amazing. That was even better than I thought. And occasionally it's like, that was intense. I don't know if I could do that again. Or like, my knees got kind of sore. Hopefully, usually be honest about what their experience was recording the scene, and you can kind of see some of the humanity in that too. I also love 4chambers.com, run by the creator Vex Ashley out of the UK. In her words, it's like art school bullshit. It's high production value in a really interesting aesthetic world. It's a lot of non-linear videos, films, like it's a lot of really creative editing and creative production. So it's like beautifully shot scenes, but they don't follow that classic structure of we're starting with the blowjob and then maybe we get cunnilingus if we're lucky, and then it's these three positions and then the cum shot. It's interesting in its structure, and sometimes there's poetry incorporated, or she does really interesting things with like fluids and different substances and different, like she'll take a kink and kind of explore it through an artistic lens and create this really beautiful material. And a lot of it is really kinky. A lot of it is really queer, just really beautiful work. And then I also really love X Confessions, founded by Erica Lust. That's a big one. A lot of folks know I was lucky enough to interview Erica in Barcelona recently. That was a great time for the show. Beautiful offices in Barcelona, just dreamy. And that is it's a pretty huge platform at this point. They are still indie creators. It is still like a small company, but they have quite a lot that they've produced over the years. And those are also films with little stories in them. Erica started with X Confessions, which was fan, viewer, user submitted confessions that were either stories of things that they had done or fantasies that they wanted to fulfill. Erica would like take those paragraphs and turn them into films. Lots of ethnic diversity in those films, lots of queer diversity in those films, some body diversity in those films, and they're all really beautifully shot. And a lot of really incredible European performers. Bellesa is another go-to, and this is the kind of the one I point to women who are just getting into porn who maybe want something that feels mainstream, like it's a pretty femme site. Like if you watch a certain kind of mainstream television and you want to try a more accessible kind of mainstream kind of porn, but you want to feel a little safer about the content you consume and you don't want to be confronted by a horrible ad of like The Simpsons having sex or something on the free aggregates. Bellesa is a good site because they have a lot of content available for free. They have a lot that you can watch. They also sell toys. So their model set up that it's like call it like good entry level porn for femmes who are looking to see that kind of thing. Very conventionally attractive people primarily. So I'd say like it's not for everyone in that sense, but for some it can be a good entry point.
Yeah, those are great recommendations. Thank you. Thanks. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy those.
Yes, please write them down. I've definitely been at like Shaw conferences and gotten into these dialogues and be like, wait, what is it? Like all these practitioners writing down all the sites so they have them. I'm very happy to share it. I love helping people find good content. And I will say the other thing is like going straight to the performers is a really ethical way to consume. If there's a performer that you really like their work and you really like the scenes that they make that you might find on the porn hubs or the whatever the world, that going to their OnlyFans, their ManyVid, their own platforms and supporting them directly or buying their clips directly from them is a great way to get content if you like that kind of thing too.
Are you curious about sexology? Do you want to further integrate sexology into your work or your life? Well, friends, then we've got something just for you. It's called the Sexology Practice Guide, and it walks you through the ways this shows up in your work, in your life, and guides you through working within your scope, incorporating intimacy and sexual health into your work without starting over. Download this short, practical guide at sexologylab.com/guide. That's sexologylab.com/guide. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe and share. And now, back to the show. I want to know a little bit more about the writing that you've done in the sexual health space. Can you tell us more about that?
It's that I feel like is the arm that's like developing in its own way slowly. It's like the burgeoning aspect of my career, I would say. Historically have been a writer for many years, but mostly in entertainment. Like I am and was a screenwriter for many years, and I still screenwrite as a passion. I no longer work for studios doing that, but have, for example, a polyamory horror feature that I'm working on right now. So there's still some like really fun overlap. But what I like to write now is primarily on my Substack. And I think I'm kind of finding what feels most constructive and what feels most helpful to my audience. Like right now, the Substack is largely focused on non-monogamy resources because that is a lot of the work I do with clients. So it's a lot of talking through what those relationship dynamics can look like and different kind of tools tools and communication skills and kind of resources on that front. But I think where my passion resides is this kind of sweet spot between the personal essay and something that feels a little more like a resource or a little more academic. I wrote a piece for the Erotic Review. When would that have been? Not last year, but the year before, that I was really proud of, that was about non-monogamy. And it was kind of a revisitation of the book, The Ethical Slut, that is just a practical handbook on non-monogamy and its canon. It was well ahead of its time when it was first published, and it's sold incredibly well over many, many years. It's kind of a like, you need to read this if you're going to consider non-monogamy kind of thing. But I revisited it through the lens of a fictionalized story about being in the position of navigating a dynamic between a couple with a personal relationship to them, and also being invited to work with them as a practitioner, kind of talking about the ethics of that. And but also like really looking at the ethics of the dynamic that created between me and this woman, and being the third in the relationship. It kind of touches on like some couples privilege. I really love this work because I love people and their vices and their impulses and their desires. And I love when that gets into messy territory. So I like to write from that place that sometimes the writing can feel a little more clinical, or like, here are the 3 things you can do too, which like isn't quite my favorite way to write, but people really gobble that up and they want those resources in these spaces. But I like to write about the human experience of sex and relationships and how rich that is, like how much raw material. So that's, I think, where my writing is aiming. I'm slowly, I guess this is the first time I'll like say it aloud in a public space, but I'm thinking about what it would look like to write a book, and it's not fully formed, but I think what I'm chewing on is the idea of writing something about different stories of love, like a series of essays or short stories about different forms of love, and some told through the lens of like, how does love show up in a kinky sex dynamic, or how does love show up in a platonic dynamic, but where there's romance there, like where there's a kind of love in that friendship that's often underrated in the way that we rank romance and platonic love in different ways in our societies. I think that's on the horizon. I need to find time to like really write that, because I really want the writing to feel rich and much like stories and prose as told from the perspective of practitioners. So I'm kind of finding the sweet spot of what that would look like, but that's what my writing is these days.
Okay, so you have to keep us updated like on all the things you're doing, because we want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, what's been the biggest challenge for you talking about sex publicly, like through media, through your podcast, through writing, all of that? Like, has anything been difficult for you?
A few things are difficult. It's delicate to step into this space and like examine and be aware of and be careful and hesitant about the impact that will have on the rest of your life. Like when we started Girls on Porn, I didn't use my last name. It was like hosted by Rachel and Laura, and we just didn't put our last names anywhere. Not because I would be concerned about most people finding it and finding out I was doing this, but that I didn't want you to Google me and have just the word porn show up first, right? Like I didn't want that to be attached to my name. Now it very much is, and I couldn't be happier, but it was kind of a process of building that comfort. And once we were really out in the space, then the show was more established and it was getting great feedback, and it was clearer, not to everyone, of course, but like apparent to most what the show was about, like what its intent was, what its mission was. Then I felt more comfortable being more public about it. And slowly like the platform grew and it became this thing that, I was just really proud of. So that discomfort slowly went away. And I felt like, okay, I'm now just a very publicly sex positive person. And that's fine. But that I needed to sort of like start in the shallow end before I worked myself into the deep end. And now I think I'm deeper in. The challenge now and always, and is I'm very aware of even as we're talking right here, is censorship and is the language that you can use in spaces online. Idea for the podcast was so great at the outset because it was an auditory medium. Oh, this is great. We don't have to worry about the visuals and the censorship and whatever. We can say whatever language we want in the podcast. And I don't think people were even using explicit ratings at that point. You know what I mean? Like this was before there was any attempt at regulation around those spaces. So I was like, oh, we can describe porn in vivid detail and use any language we need to. Yeah. And that'll be a great space for that. And people can tune on the subway. They can put their headphones in and no one has to know. And it's a fun little secret.
Yeah.
But then you take that into the space of the Metas and the YouTubes and all of these platforms that the dynamics have shifted significantly.
Yeah.
They were always tricky. I think the word I'm looking for is they are deliberately opaque about what their rules are. The community guidelines are always impossible to discern. They're very vague, basically so that they can allow the Andrew Tates and what's his name, Dan Bazarian or something. I think he's like running for office now. These guys to put their content out that is like women being objectified and women naked surrounding them. But if I put my own body in that space, I get shadow banned, or I use a certain word. If you use clinically correct language in these spaces, your content gets buried. And I know that Shaw is familiar with these challenges.
We are so familiar.
I know that you navigate it all the time. You know, in the email before this, you're like, if you can think of any words instead of porn. I was like, yep, that's the problem. We could say corn the whole interview. I usually just like bleep stuff out or just detach, I just cut the audio for that word. And I'm like, because people will know what it is. It's infuriating. Like, I think it's so embarrassing that as a society, we know that SEGGS means something else entirely. Like that we're using gibberish. And we're using words like grape and corn. That is embarrassing. You should figure out a way to talk about that. And we should figure out a way to regulate content for children, because that is a significant concern. But there's so much out there that is so much more harmful to children than sex education. And right now, those spaces make no discernment between education and harm, right? If this is educational, can that be okay? And there's no response, and there's no one you can talk to. There's no way to get to Meta and say, hey, wait a minute, look at what I'm actually doing here.
Right.
There's no people. They've deliberately put up a wall so that they don't have to answer to you. And I could dedicate too much time talking about SESTA-FOSTA, which is a law that was passed a while ago. That it was touted as like an anti-sex trafficking law, but it's actually had the opposite effect, because it has shut down a lot of networks that workers themselves use to communicate with each other, to talk about like, hey, is this person trustworthy? What do you know about this organization? To like create their own networks of safety. And those have been dismantled. And then they're just dealing with censorship, and trafficking has gone up. So it's tricky. Any attempt to like constrain this industry, if they're not actually working with sex workers about like, how do we do this? How do we support you? How do we decriminalize? We should be decriminalizing, but that's a whole conversation. Absolutely.
And I'm curious too, like from the censorship side of things, like have you found as a creator that you can say certain things on your podcast that's like on Spotify and Apple that you would have to censor like on YouTube or Meta?
Yes. Yeah. We just don't post on YouTube for a while. I think we put our Erica Lust episode there, and that was a rarity. Like for a while we were kind of posting there a little bit, but it was trickier. And I do hear from other people who are more consistent YouTube creators that it's a more challenging space these days, and that you have to be really careful about the language you use. So yeah, we're definitely very free on our podcast. We've never edited a word in that sense. We've taken out people's names, or we've taken out things we've said about ourselves. We've never had to remove language, like explicit language, from the podcast. And TikTok, Instagram are a constant challenge, constant mess of like, wait, what happened there? We don't do much on TikTok anymore, because when we first started, it was like every other video was taken down for violating community guidelines. We were like, okay, this is impossible. We don't know what to do here. So we just didn't put much energy into it. And we mostly rely on memes that use innuendo and clips where we carefully cut out the specific words, and we're talking about explicit things, but we're not using the words that Meta would recognize. And often it's because we're talking about a niche and it doesn't know what the word cream pie is, or to censor it, right?
Right.
So that's been our workaround for the most part.
All right. Now I want to talk with you about your work as a sex coach. So what inspired you to become a sex coach?
It really was the podcast and how many people came out of the woodwork looking for support, right? Like we had a lot of listeners writing in and saying like, what do you think about this thing I'm into? Is that weird? Or I had friends approaching me and saying, hey, I can't figure out my orgasm. Is that something you know about or could help me with? And I loved it. Like I did not have the time to reply to all of the emails that we got, but especially in the early years, I would try to make a point to send them something, or be like, here's a resource. Or like, hey, I hear you, it's not weird. And I really loved that kind of work, and felt like maybe this is some aspect of my career, or maybe this is a kind of side hustle. Like this is something that I could take on alongside the work I'm doing in entertainment. And that's when I came to Shaw and said, hey, I think I might want to certify in this because I want to feel legit in what I'm offering people. I want the credential, I want the training. I want to make sure I'm not being reckless with the information I'm putting out in the world. It kind of started as like a passion endeavor, like much like the podcast of like, oh, I just want to learn about this so I'm better educated, or maybe this is something I'm going to bring into my career, but I don't know to what extent. And then I just loved it so much that I decided to do it full time. You know, when I first partnered with Shaw and was trading some tuition for promotion of the school, that brought in my early clients, and I was careful about let me not work with anyone that I feel like is out of my depths or out of the scope of work that I'd feel comfortable offering, but was working with people part-time here and there for a while I was certifying and getting to know the landscape more. And I just really loved it. And I was like, I can't imagine why I would want to keep working for problematic douchebags in Hollywood when I could be helping people with some of the most important raw material in their lives. Like, it really is such a special space to get to offer people support. It was just the natural, oh, well, let me help you out with that like led me to making this a career.
Yeah, I think that's the journey a lot of people, like a lot of students at Sexual Health Alliance, have come there because they're kind of naturally like in a position where people are asking them questions or seeking out their help. And they're like, okay, now I want the education and credentials to back it up. And I think that's kind of a common path how people end up in sex coaching.
Yeah, I love it. When I presented not too long ago, I had a couple other creators reach out and say, I'm also certifying with Shaw, who have like great platforms where they specialize in educating people about their specific expertise. And like, yeah, I went to Shaw because I wanted to get a fuller education and I wanted to round things out. I was like, oh, awesome. Me too. I was a porn expert, but I really wanted to make sure I understood all these other aspects of the work. And it's been really delightful to see so many familiar faces in the community.
I love that so much. Now I'm going to throw in a question I get from people all of the time. Where do your coaching clients come from? Do they come to you from the podcast or social media or your website, or where are they coming to you from?
For me, primarily the podcast and social media. Initially, it was the podcast more than anything. I just kind of dropped a couple ads saying like, hey, maybe you've been following my journey. It was certifying, and then now I'm doing this work. And that particular kind of client was a lot of folks who had followed the show for a while, who kind of knew me. And I think there was a level of trust built in that parasocial relationship, which I do also talk about with those clients of like, hey, I'm a different person in session than on the podcast. And on the podcast, I kind of judge these films. So I want you to know that this is a judgment-free space. And I kind of had to cultivate a different dynamic with them. But that, especially at the beginning, was where clients tended to come from. I'd say these days it's more social media. I've been lucky to build up a bigger following there. And that's where I've cultivated more of the work in non-monogamy. I think that's just an avenue, or like I found a sweet spot with certain videos and there's a really hungry audience there. So I found a lot of clients that way. And that's been really, really helpful.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I think that'll be helpful for people in this space. Now, what is the most common issue people come to you with?
There's a kind of client who are individual women who are struggling with desire. Maybe they haven't quite tapped into their sexuality in full, or they're in a dynamic with a partner where things have stagnated and they can't quite identify why they're not into it anymore. That's a really common issue. In the non-monogamy bucket, I think people come to me either in some level of conflict. They want to either like repair some ruptures they've had. They want to facilitate agreements. They want to like either open up for the first time or renegotiate some agreements around what their non-monogamy looks like. And they're looking to build better communication tools, that they might have some habits in their relationship dynamic that can be destructive or can get in the way of them actually hearing each other. So it's a lot about that kind of repair. And then I think there's also a specific kind of client. This is a lot of the men that I work with who have never really fully taken like a look at their sexuality in a profound way. They've been doing things a certain way for years, either that they have certain kinks or proclivities that are very secret and that they've never shared with anyone. And they want to unpack that and they want to be able to share it in a safe space and talk about it and talk about how they grapple with it. And sometimes that's in relationship with their partners. Can I share this with my partner about what my masturbation habits look like? How do I navigate that? And sometimes it's about like reconnecting with partnered desire, that sometimes they feel like they have a problematic relationship with porn. And they want to figure out how to bring a different kind of sexuality into their lives in real life.
Yeah. Do you find a lot of your clients are actually dealing with a disconnection from their body during sexual activity?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge, and I think it presents in different ways for different people. And ironically, it comes back to that theme of performance. I think for some people, and some of this can be gendered, some of us are highly socialized to be performative or to be only valued a certain way. And I think for a lot of women, it's like performing a certain kind of sex, or it's being on the receiving end of sex. It's being submissive. It's not saying your desires. It's not speaking to what you want. It's just being an object or being an image. And that kind of sex is not sustainable. Ultimately, we hit a wall with that, or our body starts to just rebel. Our body starts to say, like, this is a chore, or it's not comfortable, or it doesn't feel connected, or it's not supportive of my pleasure. So in a way, that desire to perform becomes a barrier because we're not communicating with our partners what we actually want. We're not either offered or asking for a safe space to have those conversations. So sex does become an obligation. And that becomes this kind of subtle erosion of consent, right? Where it starts to feel like sex isn't something I want, and I feel all this pressure to do it from my partner. And that pressure starts to feel uncomfortable, and my nervous system starts to shut down. And when my nervous system is shut down, so sorry, you're not going to be able to access your physical pleasure. Like, you're literally going to dissociate to an extent, or numb out, or just like go through the motions and not really be attuned and not really be present, which is necessary to really experience full embodied pleasure. And again, like, I'm putting these like binaries in place, and I don't want to say that it exclusively works this way, but there's a lot of socialization around this. But for like men in particular, there's a pressure to perform that can have a lot to do with how hard their dick is, or am I making her come? Am I fucking her hard enough and fast enough? Am I big enough? All of those questions and pressures can really take you out of your body. You can be stuck in your head and really thinking about all of that and not actually experiencing the pleasure. So we see these dynamics where folks aren't communicating with each other. They're not present with each other. They're performing what they think sex is supposed to look like, and they are struggling to connect, struggling to actually embody the physical experience. Now, I just put men and women on this binary. I will say that I think part of what can help queer people is something that like Dan Savage talks about a lot, is that there's fewer presumptions about what the sex is going to look like. We don't quite have such rigid scripts to work from. That what he talks about is like one of the first things you say in any gay encounter or queer encounter is like, what are you into? That even in a hookup scenario, you start with questions about what does the sex look like, as opposed to just getting to the sex and assuming it will follow a very specific script. So in a way, queer people are set up to have better sex because it's in our culture to talk about it more. But I don't want to say that we don't have problems. A lot of times the challenge is I'm new to queer sex. I'm new to my queer identity. So I feel incredibly out of my depths. I feel like a novice here. I'm worried about doing it wrong. I have questions about whether my sexual desire is present. Am I queer enough? Because my nerves are getting in the way and it's impossible to discern whether I'm enjoying this. In that case, might remind clients, hey, when you were 14, did sex feel that good, or were you so swallowed up by nerves that it was hard to actually be present? Also, I'll say for a lot of trans folks too, it's like getting to know a new body, and how do I have a sexual experience in a body that I'm just getting accustomed to, and what does sex look like in that body? There are challenges across the board, and a lot of it ties back to that theme of performance, of like, how am I supposed to show up in this space? And that often gets in the way, and that's what we have to kind of dismantle in order to be present and vulnerable and raw with another human being in order to access our pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think people are asking the question, what are you into, enough, or even know how to answer it.
Yeah, a lot of times it's like, I don't know how to answer that question because I'm feeling the pressure of like, there's something I'm supposed to say, or I haven't fully explored what I'm into. I've never really done that journey, and it is a lifelong journey, really.
So if you're listening today, that is your homework. So you need to have an answer ready for what are you into, and also be ready to ask your partner.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication, like those conversations are so crucial.
Yeah. So what is the first step to getting out of your head and back into your body during sex? What is your tip for that?
My tip for that is that you want to cultivate a space with that partner where you can actually transition into sex. Sometimes we're like, okay, put the laundry down, quickie, let's do it.
Yeah.
We're trying to like rush into it like it's on a checklist of things to do. So sometimes it's about how do I actually put down my day for a second? Like, what do I personally need to do? And I think that's an individual process that sometimes it's like, I'm just going to make a quick to-do list. I'm going to write things down that I was in the middle of that I want to finish. That way I can put that over there and I can come over here. Maybe it's about setting. It's about music and lighting and some deep breathing and connection with my partner, just like a nice long hug where we're like, okay, let's reset. Let's ground ourselves. Let's put ourselves in a different space so that I'm not thinking about the 800 things I have to do tomorrow or later today, that we can actually be present. It's about like, what does your nervous system respond to that actually makes you receptive? For some people, it's taking a walk to work off that stress, like to metabolize some of what your nervous system might be feeling, and then being ready for sex. So it's about creating space for that transition.
That's really good advice. Yeah. And is there like an exercise that helps people reconnect with sensation? So more of like a physical exercise.
I will sometimes assign to clients to explore mindful masturbation, to almost combine the practices of meditation and masturbation to take away the goal of I'm going to come right away and to explore it as a sensory experience in and of itself. What is it to slowly move your hands around your body? What is it to breathe deeply and really focus in on what the sensory experience is? What is it to explore parts of your body that aren't necessarily the most stimulating areas? You know, what is it to run your fingers over your arms, your legs, your abdomen, your breasts, if you have them, rather than I'm just going to get to it, right? I'm just going to like rush to the orgasm. To create space for presence in your masturbation practice so that you can bring that spaciousness into partnered play.
And now if somebody comes to you and they're struggling with orgasm, so do you think it's because they have the technique wrong, they're not doing the right technique, or is it they're disconnected from their body, or is it something else?
So this is where I would ask a lot of questions, right?
Yeah,
like I'd be asking, what have you explored? How much do you know? Because in some cases it's technique. It might be like, I've never really explored it all and I don't know where to begin. And so how do I figure that out? And I might be giving them some practical tools or tactics to try. But more often than not, it's something that's not physical. I would say, like, I do sex work with these folks. I'm not a sex worker, but I do work in sex and sexuality. And I'd say like 90% of sex challenges are not physical. They're mental. They're emotional. Sometimes the work is actually about dismantling shame. Sometimes the work is about creating spaciousness in their partnered plays, and that's what's blocking them from enjoying themselves fully. Sometimes it's about conflict and stress in the relationship, that a lot of couples come to me saying we have a sex problem, and the more I talk to them, the more I identify that they have an ongoing conflict in their relationship, or there's some level of resentment present, and that resentment creates a pretty firm barrier between partners, or at least for one of them, where like, I don't feel safe with you, so of course I'm not orgasming.
And now a lot of people say they want to be good in bed. In your experience, what's the biggest mistake you see people making when they're trying to be, quote, good in bed?
The biggest mistake I see when people are trying to be good in bed is that they only go to the practical techniques or the physical techniques. That they're like, okay, I just have to watch these 3 tips to blow her mind. But what they actually need to do is figure out how to be in dialogue with their partners. Not everyone likes the same thing. So how to create safe space with a partner for them to relax into the experience and for them to feel like they can actually let loose and be wild and try things and express what they want. And then you listen and you practice and you do a little, I use the like optician technique of like, is it 1 or 2? Right? How much do you like this pressure? Do you like this pressure? Do you like side to side, or do you like circles? There are tools inside of that communication, but usually the mistake is, I have to perform better. And really the fix is like, I need to better attune to my partner.
Yeah. But talking about sex is hard, even with partners. How do you get there?
You just got to do it, baby. You just got to start those conversations. If you're not comfortable having sex, I don't know how you expect to have good sex. So if you're in a dynamic where things have gotten to a point where you feel like you're not talking about sex with someone you have had sex with, we've been in a relationship for a long time, but suddenly we're just not talking about it, we're not having it, then it's a dialogue of, hey, I really care about you and I want to have a really great sex life with you. It's leading with the positive, the connection, and being vulnerable enough to say, how do we incorporate that more? What do you see? What's going on for you? Open up a dialogue with genuine curiosity and care for your partner, and then seeing where that conversation leads you.
That's such a good tip. I think a lot of people are nervous to start those conversations, or they just don't even know how.
Leading with care and curiosity is really helpful. The risk at play is my partner going to shut it down? Are they going to feel insecure? Are they going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about? Or just like not be capable because they feel judged or they feel like they're doing something wrong. So how do you approach it with that in mind? Offering a supportive space. Hey, I don't want you to feel like you've done anything wrong. I care about you. I care about this relationship. Sex is important to me, and I think we've let it dwindle. How have I contributed to that? What do you see happening? How do we collaborate to bring that back into our lives?
I would like to transition into our lightning round. I have a couple questions for you. What's a habit in the bedroom that instantly tells you someone learned about sex from porn?
Choking without me asking for it.
Ooh, that is a good one. That's a good one.
They haven't learned consent, and they are jumping right to something kind of extreme, and they're jumping to something that's a trend. So they're like, everybody's doing this.
If you could change one belief people have about pleasure overnight, what would it be?
That it's a bad thing. I would change their belief that it is a nourishing, necessary thing.
What's one sexual health book you would recommend to our audience?
Come As You Are and Come Together by Emily Nagoski.
Yep, those are good ones. What's your top advice for a first-time podcaster?
Get really clear about your concept. Organize the structure of your show into segments so that you can create something sustainable that's like easy to record repeatedly, and have fun.
I love it. That's great advice. All right. Now, you earned your certification with our sponsor, Sexual Health Alliance. Can you share more about what that experience was like for you? You've already mentioned a little bit about Shaw, which is fantastic. So what was your experience like going through the program and getting certified with Shaw?
I really loved the Shaw certification process and program. I reached out to Dr. Justin Laymiller, like, where should I go for this kind of training and credential? And he was like, I work with Sexual Health Alliance. Check them out. And it was a really good fit for me because it's a really inclusive, progressive education. And that was really important to me. I needed to know that I was working with an organization that was at the cutting edge of where this space is, because that's where I also work. So if I ever felt like there would be stigma in an unhelpful way or anything repressive, like, I just think that's antithetical to what sex education is. So yeah, I love the program. It was flexible.
I love that. And then you've come back to present with us, which has been so much fun.
Yeah, I love it. I definitely want to come back again and again.
Yes. Well, we love having you back. And thanks for being with us today. So everybody, thanks for listening. Laura Ramadei, thanks for joining us in the lab.
Of course. Thanks so much, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. Links are in the description below.